The world held its breath as the United States and China met in Stockholm. For years, these two nations have been locked in a trade war, shaking the global economy and creating uncertainty everywhere. The July 30th, 2025 meeting was a critical moment, a potential turning point. The stakes were high. Could they find a way forward, or would the world slip deeper into conflict? Stockholm, a city known for peace, was chosen as a symbol of hope. The trade war is more than a fight over money. It's a clash of ideas and ambitions. The US wants to protect its industries and technological lead, worried about unfair practices and security. China, a rising power, seeks global economic leadership and sees US actions as attempts to hold it back. This fundamental disagreement has fueled a cycle of tariffs, hurting both nations and many others. Every move, tariffs, restrictions, has global consequences. The Stockholm talks aim to pause this destructive cycle and rethink the strategy. Businesses in both countries have been hurting, and the global economy is showing strain. Other nations have urged the US and China to find a solution. The pain of the trade war has become too great to ignore. The meeting was a recognition that endless conflict serves no one. It was an admission that the current path was unsustainable. The world watched, hoping this fragile moment of diplomacy would not be wasted. The future of the global order hung in the balance. Would this be the start of a new chapter, or just another pause in a long struggle? The answer for now remains uncertain, but for a brief moment, hope was on the table. The talks in Stockholm brought together top officials from both sides. No junior diplomats here. The world hoped for a grand breakthrough, but what emerged was a 90-day truce. For 3 months, both sides agreed to pause new tariffs, offering businesses a rare window of certainty. This truce is more than a pause, it's a promise to keep talking. Working groups will tackle the toughest issues: technology, tariffs, and market access. Breaking down the conflict into smaller pieces is a practical step. The real work begins now, away from the headlines. But let's be clear, a truce is not a peace treaty. No major issues were resolved in Stockholm. Deep disagreements over technology, intellectual property, and subsidies remain. Existing tariffs are still in place and the 90-day clock is ticking. If the working groups fail, the trade war could return with even more force. The Stockholm Agreement bought time, not a solution. It's a fragile ceasefire and a long economic struggle. The world now waits to see if this time will be used wisely. Will the negotiators find common ground, or will old divisions resurface? The next 3 months will be crucial. The stakes couldn't be higher. The world is watching. The US-China trade war is about more than tariffs. It's a struggle for the future. The first issue: trade deficits. The US buys far more from China than it sells, blaming unfair practices. China says it's just global economics. The second and most critical issue is technology. Artificial intelligence, 5G, and microchips are at the heart of this rivalry. The US accuses China of stealing technology and has imposed strict export controls. China sees this as an attempt to block its rise and is investing billions to catch up. The third front: global influence. Both nations are building alliances, America with Europe and Asia, China with its Belt and Road Initiative. Countries worldwide are being forced to choose sides. These issues, trade, tech, alliances, are deeply connected. A tariff can impact a tech company, which can shift global alliances. The Stockholm Truce didn't solve these problems, it just paused them. Now, working groups face the challenge of untangling this web. Their success or failure will shape whether the US and China can coexist, or if the world splits further. The stakes are global and the clock is ticking. Can diplomacy keep up with the pace of change? The answer will define the next era. For now, the world waits. The future hangs in the balance. The trade war isn't just about numbers, it's about people. In Iowa, an American farmer lost his biggest market when China imposed tariffs on soybeans. Prices fell, income dropped, and tough choices followed: debt, selling land, or hoping for subsidies. In China, a factory worker making electronics for American companies saw orders dry up as tariffs hit. Her hours were cut, and her job is now at risk. These stories are repeated across both countries. Tariffs make goods more expensive for everyone. A washing machine in California, vitamins in Shanghai, prices rise, budgets tighten. The trade war acts like a hidden tax, quietly draining families' wallets. Economic pain creates political pressure. In the US, voters demand change. In China, leaders fear social unrest. Both governments know the human cost is unsustainable. The Stockholm Truce is a response to this pressure. It's a sign that leaders are listening to those paying the price. But unless a real solution is found, the pain will return. The stakes are personal, not just political. The world's biggest economies are fighting, but it's ordinary people who suffer most. The hope is that their voices will drive real change. The next steps will determine if that hope is realized. The tech battle is the fiercest part of the US-China rivalry. Semiconductors, tiny chips, power everything from phones to weapons. The US and its allies lead in advanced chips, and Washington restricts China's access to protect its edge. China is pouring billions into building its own chip industry, aiming for self-sufficiency. This race is about national pride and security for both sides. The world's tech supply chain is fracturing, forcing companies and countries to choose sides. The Stockholm talks paused new restrictions, but the core conflict remains. The Technology Working Group faces the toughest challenge of all. The outcome will shape the digital world's future. Beneath the tech rivalry lies a battle for rare earth minerals, essential for everything from EVs to missiles. China controls about 90% of global rare earth processing, giving it huge leverage. If China restricts exports, entire industries in the US, Europe, and Japan could be crippled. The US and allies are scrambling to build their own supply chains and break China's monopoly. This is a slow, expensive race, but critical for national security and green energy. The Stockholm Truce didn't address rare earths directly, but the issue looms large. Any long-term deal must tackle this dependency. The world is waking up to how much its future depends on a handful of minerals. The supply chain battle is just beginning. The stakes are as high as ever. The US-China rivalry is redrawing the global map. The US is strengthening alliances with Europe, Japan, and others, pushing for common rules and standards. China is building its own network through the Belt and Road Initiative, investing across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Many countries like Vietnam and Germany are caught in the middle, reliant on both giants but wary of choosing sides. The Stockholm Truce gives these nations a brief reprieve, but the pressure to pick a side is growing. If talks fail, the world could split into two economic and technological blocs. This would be a fundamental shift with huge consequences for peace and prosperity. The dream of a single globalized world is fading. The next moves by Washington and Beijing will shape the global order for decades. For now, the world is holding its breath. The stakes are not just economic, they're geopolitical. The outcome will affect every nation. The scramble for allies is on. The 90-day truce is fragile and could fail for many reasons: political pressure, deadlocked talks, or new crises. If it breaks, expect a new, more intense round of tariffs and economic pain. Supply chains would be disrupted, prices would rise, and a global recession could follow. Trust between the US and China would collapse, pushing both toward economic decoupling. This would mark the start of a long-term strategic rivalry, a new kind of Cold War. Global cooperation on issues like climate change and pandemics would suffer. The world would become more divided and unstable. The failure of Stockholm would be more than economic. It would reshape the world order. The risks of conflict, both economic and military, would rise for everyone. As the Stockholm summit ends, the world faces more questions than answers. The 90-day truce is a hopeful pause, but the core disagreements remain. The next 3 months are critical. Will the working groups make real progress, or just delay the inevitable? Best case, the truce leads to a broader agreement and some relief for the global economy. Worst case, talks collapse, the trade war intensifies, and the world splits into rival blocs. Most likely we'll see managed competition. Tensions remain, but all-out conflict is avoided. Watch for signals from officials, announcements from working groups, and shifts in economic data. The road ahead is uncertain, but the door to a better future is open, if only a crack. The next 90 days will shape the future of global trade. The world is watching, and the stakes could not be higher. The outcome will define our era.